Okay. Good evening, everyone in the gallery tonight. Thank you for coming tonight. This is our last agenda forum for December, and welcome those to the Ordinary Council meeting next week if you're going to come and join us. Tonight, we'd just like to do the acknowledgement of country. The City of Swan acknowledges the traditional custodians of this region, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their continuing connection to the land, waters, and community. And we pay our respects to elders past and present and their descendants. The terms and conditions of entry into this meeting are posted at the entry of the public gallery, and members of the public are advised to read them prior to attending this meeting and abide by them. Tonight's attendance and apologies. We have everyone in the chamber tonight, and we have Councillor Howlett attending electronically up on the screen. At this point, I have no leave of absences, but if councillors do have a requirement, they've got the forms in the drawer underneath to fill in and hand up to the CEO. I have no declarations of financial and proximity interest and interests affecting impartiality. Mr. CEO, are there any declarations?
Thank you. Wait, I haven't got sound. I'll speak loudly, suppose, for the purposes of recording. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have one declaration of interest at this stage in item 14.4. From Councillor Johnson, being an impartiality interest. I would simply also note for councillors present tonight that a number of you have previously made financial or proximity interest declarations in the same item and would need to do so prior to that being considered tonight. And Councillor Dawn, I'm not aware if you live in that precinct, but something for your consideration. If you do, you'll have a financial interest in the matter.
Okay, and then we move on to reports and notices of motion. Oh, any petitions? Are there any petitions to be handed in tonight? No petitions in the gallery? And then move on to deputations. So 6.2, in accordance with current procedures for public participation at agenda forums, all requests for in-person deputations were required by 5 p.m. on Tuesday the 5th of December 2023. And all written deputations received by 3 p.m. Tuesday, the 5th of December, again 2023, were circulated with the preliminary agenda on Tuesday evening. So tonight we move on to 14.3.1, the Responsible Authority Report, the State Administrative Tribunal, reconsideration of refusal of proposed roadhouse, Lot 31, number 1487, Neves Road in Bullsbrook, DA 696/22 on page 56. So we have in-person deputations tonight, and I'll just let you know that we've got a new timing system. So you'll see a bright green fluorescent timer up on our screens, but also up on the back screen here. So there won't be a 2-minute warning, but you'll have the clock ticking to 3 minutes for your deputation. And so first we have Mr. Justin Blinman, not in support of the officer's recommendation. Are you here tonight? Hi, Justin. Welcome. Good, thanks. So you have 3 minutes to deliver your deputation. If you just pop the speaker on there. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, members of council. My name's Justin Blinman and I've lived at 69 Kirby Road, Bullsbrook. I've been there for about 26 years. My property is directly next door to proposed development, and I'd like to state that I'm strongly against the officer's recommendation for the proposal for the roadhouse at Lot 31, Neves Road, Bullsbrook. I don't believe a small few changes that were implemented by the applicant should affect the unanimous council decision and the JDAP decision to oppose the development. This truck stop will be less than 200 metres from our house, less than 50 metres from Lot 32, which is directly across the road, less than 150 metres from another property, and just over 200 metres from another. The development's proximity is in direct contradiction of the State Planning Policy 4.1 Industrial Interface Policy SPP 4.1, which states buildings of this nature are not to be within 200 metres of residential dwellings. The fact still remains that both ourselves, our neighbours and the proposed development are located in a dangerous fire zone, with plenty of close calls in history which demonstrates the risk of associated with the site. After witnessing such fires, in my opinion, a few water tanks and a few other small mitigation won't do much to mitigate the risk. We're also very concerned about the fuel smells and spills. This site is mapped as an environmentally sensitive area and is located on a sewerage sensitive area, and is also less than 600 metres from a significant wetlands and threatened priority ecological communities. Another major concern is the truck noise coming and going with the air brakes when the trucks are slowing down. Although all sorts of traffic, including large trucks, are using Neves Road, They're travelling at approximately 80 kilometres an hour, and we do hear a few rattles and bumps occasionally, but this is completely different from heavily laden trucks starting from a standstill, going through the gears to get up to the speed limit of 80 kilometres. That's really, really noisy. Just think of yourselves being next to a set of lights and a great big truck taking off. I think the truck noise will either wake my family in the middle of the night or make it almost impossible for us to fall asleep. In either instance, our ability to get a good night's sleep will be ruined, affecting not only our lifestyle and enjoyment of our own property, as is our right under common law, but also of neighbours who are significantly closer to the development. I'd also like to comment that this type of building does not, in my opinion, fit into the surrounding environment of rural setting, which is unique to the area. And although I do know it doesn't relate to a building issue, there is a truck fuel stop station currently under construction about 4 k's east, just off the Tonkin Highway Neves Road entry point. And also approved is yet another fuel stop station 3 kilometres to the west. I do question the need for another similar facility given its close proximity to the residential properties and a substantial effect it's going to have on the residents and our lifestyles. I implore you, please do not set aside a decision that was dated 25th of May 2023. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Justin. Next I have questions from Councillor Bowman.
Thank you for that. Just 2 questions. Firstly, for those councillors who aren't aware of the area, if you're standing on the site looking half a kilometre in all directions, what roughly would you see?
You're standing on the site where you'd see the property directly across the road. Like I said, 30 to 50 metres from the proposed fuel station. If you look across to the east, you'll see another house, which is about 150 metres. Then you wouldn't see mine because it's bushland. It's at the back of it. And if you peer through between those, you'd see another property, which I mentioned, which is about 200 metres. Wetlands. That's about it.
And so, obviously, well, you're pretty well saying they're all rural.
All rural properties, yes.
Okay. And you talked about the fire risk. Do you think there was anything that could be done to mitigate that fire risk to be acceptable to those that live in the area?
No, not really. And another point of the matter is if and when there is another fire, well, the one we had a few years ago, we had a helicopter over my property. We had 4 fire trucks with their water hoses in our water tanks and in our swimming pool and looking after all the houses. I just wonder if a fire does come again, are they going to be looking after our houses or looking after the fuel station? Probably the fuel station.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from councillors regarding Mr Justin Blimmen's deputation?
Sorry.
Before he goes. Are there any questions to staff regarding this item? No, we're going to go through questions to staff now.
I think what Councillor Bowman is suggesting is get through all of the deputations on the matter and then
we're going
take
to do
any
it?
questions.
I think we'll do questions to staff on each deputation. So have you got any questions now? Okay, we can take them at the end then. Yep. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And we've got Mrs. Margaret Carlton, not in support of the officer recommendation. Thanks, Margaret. You have 3 minutes up there on the screen.
Oh, it's on. Good evening, Mayor, councillors and everyone in the gallery. My name is Margaret Cull, excuse me, and I'm against the responsible authority to report the RAR recommendation and oppose the proposed roadhouse at Lot 31, 1487 Neves Road, Bullsbrook. Myself and Anthony Lindsay own Lot 32, 1506 Neves Road, Bullsbrook. And I have lived there for approximately 19 years, and it is zoned general rural. Our property is directly opposite Lot 31, the actual site for the proposed development, and it's directly opposite across from our house, and our house is only approximately 30 metres from the road front. At present, there is only 1 row of immature trees along our front fence. You can see this on page 88 in the picture in the RAR. You can see how close we are. Due to this proximity, the proposed development would have a major negative effect on us, on our rural amenity, and also that of the other local residents. And this would be in the following ways. Aesthetically, and I've noticed in the new RAR, there is a slight change to the colouring and the finishes. They've also reduced the site elevation from 2.5 metres above ground level to 1.1, and the development has been reoriented to reduce the building block along the road front. To be quite honest, we are so close, that will make next to no difference for us. The buildings will stand up over our place. The lighting from the buildings, 24 hours a day, will glow onto our property. We won't have darkness anymore, whereas at the moment it is very dark where we live. There's no street lighting. And as Justin pointed out, we are within the 200 metre generic buffer or separation distance that's supposed to be around service stations operating for 24 hours to protect our land use and ourselves from potential risk and gaseous noise and odour emissions associated with such developments. I don't know how that could possibly be managed. We have northerly winds on hot days. It would blow fuel, fumes and everything else straight into our house, and it would also affect our stock. The noise, as Justin said, trucks slowing down and entering and exiting all night long. Cars arriving, people yelling. I don't know if they're allowed to have music all night. And yeah, it's not something that we're ever going to be able to live with. There's also, this area does not have scheme water, and we, the local residents, all rely on the shallow water bores for our homes and rural activities. It's also located within a sewage sensitive area, and reticulated sewage connection is unavailable. So this just makes contamination of the groundwater so much more of a threat for us, and would be catastrophic for us, as well as for the surrounding woodlands and wetlands with the diverse
Thank you very
fauna
much,
and flora.
Margaret, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll wait for...
Any questions from councillors? Councillor Bloom.
Sorry if you mentioned this. How long have you lived at your property for?
19 years.
Okay, so in the 19 years, obviously, know the Neves Road is single lane. Have you seen near misses, crashes or anything like that?
We actually had a car crash into our property last Saturday.
Okay. And the increase, I assume, in usage of that road, how would you describe that over more so the last 5 years?
Extreme,
Okay,
but only in the daytime.
Okay.
There's rarely any traffic at all at night time.
okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions from the deputy, from councillors? No. We have Mr. Richard James, not in support of the officer recommendation. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. CEO, councillors and staff. Richard James, representing the North Swan Land Conservation District Committee. With regard to the Neves Road Roadhouse proposal, even with the increased conditions attached to this development, I still object to this development proposal on environmental grounds. A while back, one of the City of Swan councillors told me that planning conditions are not worth the paper that they are written on. Surely all conditions relating to a development application must be explicit and measurable, and they need to have clear consequences for non-compliance. This will ensure that when you, the councillors, vote, you are making an informed decision based on clear facts. If you look at condition 5 on this proposal, it deals with water quality management. The question there I have is, what is the required frequency of the water quality monitoring? Is it annually, monthly? There's no detail. And what will the analysis be looking for? Nutrients, hydrocarbons? Once again, no detail. The condition must be specific. And condition 6, which deals with the potential for erosion and sediment control. The condition states that the plans need to minimise those effects. What does minimise mean? It's a very subjective term. Will some water erosion and sedimentation be allowed? If so, how much? The condition must adhere to the City of Swan Specification 211, the control of erosion and sedimentation. And in the section on clearing of native vegetation, the City of Swan should require a permit to clear native vegetation to be obtained from the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation before a permit to build is issued. It is not good enough to rely on a determination by the planning department. They are not experts when it comes to making these determinations and have made errors in the past. It must be determined by DEWA. Also, with regard to the 12,000 square metres of land immediately to the west of the site, which is proposed to be revegetated, has a revegetation plan been completed and approved by the City of Swan and/or the Department of Biodiversity, Conservation and Attractions? If not, why not? And at the, sorry, I don't have time to make that point. So whilst there is still a high degree of ambiguity with this development proposal, I would urge you to vote against it, as you did last time it came before council.
Thank you, Mr James. Are there any councillor questions for Mr James? Thanks, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, you mentioned that we've obviously got it wrong before regarding clearing. One that comes to my mind is the dog training there as well. Noticing that it's 1.2 hectares and DBCA have not provided a response, do you think that is of concern to councillors and we should be asking for that response before we make a decision?
From DBCA, they did make a very thorough submission to the original proposal back in February. I would urge all of the councillors to access their complete submission that they've made. The fact that they haven't responded to the current proposal, I can't answer that, although I have spoken to DBCA today on this particular issue, and I have requested that they reissue the original submission to councillors before next week.
And second question, do you think there could be additional conditions added to the recommendation that would minimise the risks that you've mentioned?
If you're referring to something in the lines of water quality monitoring, you would have to monitor the water entering the site, so up gradient of the site, and then a number of water quality monitoring bores down gradient of the site, so that you can measure the quality entering and leaving the site. With regard to compliance, if there was any change to the quality of the water, either by nutrients or hydrocarbons or any other pollutants, then the proponents would need to agree to stop their operation until the source of the contamination can be found and rectified.
Okay, are there any other questions, Councillor Henderson? I'll take that one at the end, thank you. Are there any other questions from councillors for Mr James? Nope. Thank you very much. And now we have Mr Ross Underwood from Planning Solutions in support of the officer's recommendation. Thanks, Mr Underwood.
Thank you, Mayor and councillors, and welcome to the new councillors on this committee. We act for Justin Quinn Schofield, who has owned and managed this property for over 18 years now. The proposal before you tonight is a lot different to what was presented back to council in May earlier this year. There's been a lot of work and changes that have been made. So, for instance, the setback to Neves Road, originally 4 metres, is now 10 metres, and landscaping has been incorporated into that wider setback area. The floor levels have been lowered. The amount of fill required is much less than what was originally proposed. There is more work that's been put into the materials and colours of the building to give it a much more rural aesthetic. We've reduced the scale of the building, particularly the truck facilities, by reducing the amount of houses, truck parking, and removing the maintenance bay within that. So in short, we feel we've addressed the point 1 of the council's original concerns around the rural amenity and the scale of the development. In terms of reason number 2, which related to design principles under State Planning Policy 7, we've engaged the services of an architect who has completely revisited and overhauled the previous set of plans and come up with a new concept. We've also hired a landscape architect to go into a lot more detail on the landscaping proposed. So what we have is we feel a much more rounded and better development, and we've received the support of the City of Swans Design Review Committee for that particular proposal. The proposal has been supported by a range of technical reporting that's addressed many of the issues that some of the other presenters have mentioned tonight, so including reports addressing transport, particularly traffic, noise, bushfire considerations, lighting, and in particular environment, and in that respect there's been a lot of work done to assess in much more detail the flora and fauna which is on the site of the proposed development. It has confirmed the earlier assumptions that were made in respect of environmental considerations. So there's no issues or concerns that have been raised through that particular process. The other thing we have incorporated into this proposal is over 12,000 square metres of rehabilitation that wasn't in the previous proposal. So we're removing an old house and an outbuilding and restoring much of the bushland. And as you'll be aware, on this 41 hectare property, about 90% of it is already vegetated. So we're improving the amount of vegetation on the property in net as a result of this proposal. So we look forward to the council's support of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Underwood. Are there any questions from councillors for Mr Underwood? Councillor Bowman?
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. You mentioned that a lot has changed, and I'll pick on the colours, etc., that meet the rural aesthetics. Would whoever's going to go in there, be it the Caltex, the BHPs or whoever, do they not have corporate branding requirements, and as such there'd be no difference to those?
That relies mainly to the signage component. So the building, the colours and materials, if this is approved, would be subject to a condition and the plans provided. So any changes would require a reassessment. And it's quite common in respect of roadhouse proposals in rural areas to provide for a departure from the corporate standards to meet local requirements. So I don't anticipate that those elements would be lost.
Okay. You mentioned that there's been lots of change, and unfortunately I couldn't see too much myself in the report with things like colour and that. The only thing I could see was you're going to have some wood grain aluminium. What else am I missing? Obviously, putting aside, you've got some pretty pictures of trees there. What else has changed from a aesthetics point of view?
It's not only the woodwork aluminium, there's also stonework which has been incorporated into the facade. And of course, the previous proposal, you might recall, included what could be described, and I believe the design review panel called it quite garish colours. There were lots of reds and blues and primary colours of that nature. So those have been removed and replaced with much more natural colours, including more of a charcoal paint scheme.
And final question through you, Madam Mayor. Obviously, there still is 2 properties within the 200 metre area. So nothing's changed there. It hasn't moved further away from those. Am I correct?
Slightly further.
Okay, so how far are those 2 properties now compared to what they were?
Well, the properties haven't moved, but I think where you're going is that there's the Environmental Protection Authority guidelines on separation distances that in respect of a 24-hour facility, provides a generic separation of 200 metres to those facilities. Now, those guidelines are intended as a trigger, and where that trigger is met, which includes in this instance, there's a more detailed analysis which is undertaken to confirm that there's no unreasonable impact. So that work's been done there. Our environmental consultant has addressed those particular considerations. And particularly in regards to noise. I mean, noise is the main impact with respect to a 24-hour facility above any other daytime facility. So we have a noise report that demonstrates that the relevant levels will be met.
What about odour?
That's not a problem for these types of facilities. So
Okay, thank you. I've got questions of staff when I get a chance, Madam Mayor.
I've got a question from Councillor Howlett. Councillor Howlett, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
A little bit. Can you try a bit louder? Oh, I think
I can talk louder. Have you got me now?
that's okay. Have you got a question there for Mr Underwood?
I have, thank you, Mr. Underwood. To date, no stormwater plan has been submitted on either application, the original or the amended. Can you advise why that hasn't happened and when that will happen, please?
Can you hear that all
Yes.
right, Mr Underwood?
Yes, thank you, councillor, and I've heard that question, so thank you. There has been a lot of work in terms of some groundwater analysis, and that's informed the updated design, including the lower level of the building, which has been a direct result of that groundwater analysis. The provision of stormwater plans as a condition of approval is quite common and standard, and the facility that was approved further west included a very similar condition to what's been proposed by the officers.
Okay. Did you have any further questions, Councillor Howlett?
Well, yes, so when will you be submitting your stormwater plan?
In accordance with the condition, so if it's required prior to the submission of a building permit, as I expect it is, then it would be provided before then.
Okay.
Okay, are there any further questions from councillors to Mr Underwood regarding this item? No? Thank you very much, Mr Underwood.
Thank you very much.
We also had a written deputation submitted from Keisha McKnight, not in support of the officer recommendation. And are there any other questions from councillors to staff on this item? Councillor Bowman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And just continuing on from my questions that I submitted on Monday, noting that it's only a 10-metre setback and Neves Road is in the future going to be dualled, will that create any problems? And can we get maybe a more thorough response as not as what I got on today, which we don't think it will do? Please.
Mr Russell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. In essence, reiterate the
Microphone,
advice of Councillor Bowman.
Mr Russell, your microphone.
I'll just raise my voice a tad. Can everyone hear that?
Working.
Try that.
Okay, let me restart. In answer to Councillor Bowman's question, yes, we're confident that the setback proposed for the service station from Neves Road will be sufficient to dual Neves Road, which is at another 10 metres to the existing 10-metre carriageway. Nominally, or usually, it's 5 metres either side.
So my follow-up question was that if we were to dual Neves Road, will we have to purchase any property or is there enough width in the current road reserve?
Mr Russell?
Through Madam Mayor, in the ordinary course, unless land is given up free of cost through the subdivision process, the requirement to widen roads entails a land acquisition process.
Any further questions, Councillor Bowman?
Madam Mayor, I don't think my question was answered. My question was... Thank you.
So again, the question is, in this case, is there a requirement to acquire land?
There will be.
So would I be correct then that then 10-metre setback would now be less than 10 metres because obviously when we acquire land, it's closer? Just making sure I understand right.
That is correct.
My next question is, Mr Underwood said it now has the support of the Design Review Committee. Is that correct, or have they just said it is better than what it was previously?
Both, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. And the final one is, without having DBCA response, is it open to this council to defer it until we get that response, noting that I think staff have told me that won't come till January?
Through Madam Mayor, of course, it's open to council to defer or not recommend in support of this application to the JDAP.
So supplementary question for that, are we on a time limit because it's a reconsideration that then we'll have to go to JDAP and then go back to SAT?
Through Madam Mayor, you are on a time limit, but neither the SAT nor the JDAP can compel the council to make a recommendation if it doesn't wish to.
So, Madam Mayor, can I ask then, When are we required to give that response to JDAP or SAT? What's the deadline?
Now, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Russell. Are there any other questions from councillors to staff on this item? Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. In respect of the officer's recommendation of conditions number 6, it was raised that under that will be minimised during the works towards the end of the paragraph. How do we enforce that, or what would the measures be for staff to be able to give a satisfactory result on that?
Mr Russell.
Through Madam Mayor, well, common elements to mitigate against wind erosion would be barriers, mulching of construction sites, ensuring that you have appropriate channels to manage water so it's not running off the site, all the ordinary day-to-day mitigation matters that you see on building sites.
Supplementary to that, and how are we going to deem what minimising is? That's what I think Mr James was raising, and is there some way that there is a measure that the community at least can connect with?
Through Madam Mayor, you don't see excessive windborne dust and you don't see water rolling across property boundaries.
Are there any further questions from councillors to staff on this item? If not, we'll move on to item 14.3.2 and thank those in the gallery for the last item. With existing retaining walls and fill, lot 259, number 51, Jinder Road, Kungamaya, DA 58523, page 100 for councillors. We have in-person deputations from Mr Matthew Bingham on behalf of Simone Solomon, not in support of the officer recommendation. Mr Bingham, are you here tonight? Thank you. And you have 3 minutes for your deputation.
Good morning, good evening everyone. My name is Matthew Bingham and I'm a licensed surveyor here representing Simone Solomon, the owner of 49 Jinder Road, Kungamaya. Simone sends her apologies as she had a planned surgery today. Simone strongly objects to the third resubmitted application for illegal and non-compliant works. Her reasons include complete disregard for the council's motion, dated the 7th of September 2022. Not one point in the council's motion has been rectified or addressed. The current application still does not comply with any local or state government policy or legislation. Mr Costley's complete disregard for Simone as the adjoining landowner. She was never consulted prior to or during these illegal and non-compliant works taking place. When these illegal works were initially being undertaken, Mr Costley was directed to the city to submit for approval. However, he went ahead and completed his works without that approval. The illegal filling of the yard has the potential to create overlooking issues, despite any reduction in the fence height. Mr Costley has again not submitted plans when he recently built an outdoor area without approval. It has not been set back enough from the common boundary and has the potential to further impact the overlooking issues. This current proposal is misleading and grossly incorrect. It does not disclose the true extent of Mr Costley's works. Works further proposed will compound the current issues, including overshadowing in Simone's garden and main outdoor area. It is not neighbourly and appears prison-like. It blocks the breeze and ventilation. It is not aesthetically pleasing and it is very imposing. It does not fit with the streetscape and suburb. The proposed fence reduction to 1.3 metres atop the 1.48 metre retaining wall still means an overall fence height of 2.78 metres along Simone and Mr Costley's common property. Plus add the hedge screen and you have the potential for a max height of 6.48 metres. This is insane. This new application is proposing a structure that has the potential to almost double the height of what was refused by council last year. Mr Costley does not even maintain his garden. Simone has to trim all the plants along their common boundary, and she's noted that the council cuts his front verge. Simone is a town planner, and she's had multiple town planners review this application, and they are all in agreement that it does not comply with the residential design codes. It should not be recommended for approval. The recommendation for approval is also in conflict with the council's motion as previously noticed. It is deeply upsetting that people can build what and how they please without any due regard for the rules or their neighbours, in particular motions by council. It is unneighbourly and, if approved, will set a poor precedent whereby people can do as they please without any consequence.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from councillors for Mr Bingham? Councillor Bowman?
Just one quick one, and I'm sure something came maybe from Simone. Since the last time council dealt with this, has there been another structure built on the property?
Simone's telling me, yeah, there's been an outdoor sitting area, living area.
Able to explain what? No, okay.
This is what she's told me.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question from Councillor Howlett. Do you want to go next?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. The recommended planting is for lily pillies. I understand they throw quite a bit of fruit and small berries. Is the person that you're representing concerned about that also interfering with her backyard?
That is one of the concerns, yes.
Thank you.
And also had a question from Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, my question really relates to the retaining wall and the fence. So, is it correct that the retaining wall is right on the boundary between the two properties?
Yeah, within 100 mil.
And what would the deemed to comply setback of that retaining wall be?
Off the top of my head, I don't know that one, but it's 1.5 metres, I think, is it?
Yeah, I think it's 1.5. So what you're saying is it should be set back 1.5 metres from the boundary of the property,
yes.
So into the sort of the applicant's property.
That's correct.
So what we've got is a retaining wall which is actually on the boundary, and how high is the retaining wall?
1.5 metres.
And directly on top of that 1.5 metre retaining wall, there's a fence, and how high is the fence?
1.8 currently.
0.8. So that's what's that? 1.4 is it? And 1.8. So that's not very good at it. 3.2 metre high, in effect, fence at the moment. Is that right?
Correct.
And they're proposing to reduce it by what? Just
500 mil.
Yeah, 50 centimetres. So, in your experience as a planner, have you seen in a residential suburb a wall of this size?
No, I'm not a planner.
All right.
No, I haven't seen anything quite
Okay.
like that.
Are there any other questions for Mr Bingham from councillors? Well, thank you very much for your deputation. We have another in-person deputation from Andrew Biondi from Cornerstone Town Planning in support of the officer recommendation. Thank you, Andrew. We've got 3 minutes for a deputation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Deputy Mayor and councillors, thanks for having me tonight. Terry wanted to actually be here tonight, but he tested positive to COVID about an hour and a half ago, so he's not available to answer questions. So obviously council will be familiar with this application. It did come to you for consideration in its currently constructed format back in September of 2022. Council obviously refused the application for a number of reasons that related to the extent and amount of fill, the boundary retaining wall, and then obviously the detrimental visual impact that the wall would have on the neighbouring property. As a result of that refusal, council staff issued a direction to my client, which is Mr Costley, to essentially remove that wall as there was no approval. Now, we have some proceedings sitting in the background of this application here tonight, but we put those on hold to basically come up with a new proposal and address the concerns that the neighbour has on the western side of the property. So the main changes that we're proposing, we're not proposing to change the retaining wall. The retaining wall will stay as is, or that's what we propose. Now, it is a maximum height of 1.4 metres, but at the other end is much shorter than that. So it just gets a little bit higher as you get to the rear of the property. But we are proposing to cut back the fence from 1.8 metres and bring it down to 1.293. Now, I just want to pause for a moment and explain where that 1.293 comes from. In the city's town planning scheme, there is a provision for aggregate for fence heights no more than 2.4 metres. Now, that 1.293 makes sure that the aggregate height of the retaining and the fence sitting on top of that is within that 2.4 metre height measured from the natural ground level. And that's actually shown on the elevation plans if you wanted to have a look at that. But then obviously if you cut back the fencing height, you then create an overlooking issue. And to address that, you could incorporate screening, but that would obviously defeat the purpose of putting in screening because obviously a concern is the visual impact. Now, this area, I've been out to site, there's a lot of greenery, there's a lot of landscaping, and we thought by finding an appropriate species of screening, and lily pillies are quite dense, that would be a suitable way to address the overlooking issue. So while it doesn't mean the deemed to comply requirements of the R codes, we believe, and obviously the city's officers are of the same view, that it does meet the design principles and addresses the relevant design principles under the R codes. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very much on time. And I've got questions from Councillor Bowman. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So the boundary fence now is going to be 1.293. Is that boundary fence also the pool fence?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. So that obviously is the next step of this process. So obviously we're trying to seek approval here for what is constructed, but the fencing associated with the pool, we do need to actually look at that, and Terry and I are more than happy to work with the city staff, the building department, to work out how we get compliance. Now, whether that's putting another fence internally around the pool, I'm not sure entirely, but that is something that we have discussed with Mr. Phil Russell and Darcy, and we are looking at that.
So it's been a while since I've been there, but there's the pool, there's a little bit of a spa thing, which is even closer. How are you going to actually have an internal fence height, because obviously the boundary fence doesn't comply with pool regulations, of 1.293, needs to be a dividing height of 1.8 on the dividing fence. How are you going to have the internal pool fence of that spa area far enough away from the dividing fence without actually moving that spa part, which is part of the pool?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Councillor, and that is a good question. The spa is a little bit closer to the fence than the main part of the pool. That spa, we did actually talk when Terry and I were out on site with the designer, that spa could potentially be moved in order to ensure compliance. However, I'm not sure how that would work, and I don't want to sit here and provide an answer that I don't fully know the answer to. But that is something that we can look at.
So distance from the boundary fence to the edge of that spa is?
Oh, I'd have to have a look at the site plan, but 0.5 metre, roughly.
And part of this, the shell of the spa is part of the shell of the pool?
It can be modified, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Catalano, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. So which section of the property is going to be overlooking over the neighbour's property?
So if you're facing the property from the street, it would be the left-hand side, so the western boundary onto 49 Jinder.
Okay, so
yep.
how is a person going to be able to overlook another property if the fence is high enough?
Well, that's what we're proposing. We're proposing to put in landscaping to address that overlooking issue with a dense plant.
Okay, so ultimately the issue is that the infill has created a problem whereby you can't put in fencing that alleviates the problem of overlooking. Is that correct?
Well, obviously the preference was to keep the fence height at 1.8, which is a standard fence, but we are seeking to have an aggregate fence height no greater than 2.4, which, yes, does create the overlooking issue.
Okay, and finally, how much along the length of that boundary does this proponent's property overlook into the neighbour?
So I think it's about 14.5 metres, but I would also like to note, councillor, that there are 2 sheds along that boundary on the neighbour's property that actually roughly half of that 14 metres that obstruct views as well from my client's property into the neighbour's property.
And finally, what's the length of the whole boundary?
Would you mind if I checked on the plan to give you an accurate answer?
Go ahead.
Sorry?
Yes, please,
Yes.
go ahead.
Sorry, just give me a moment. Thank you. My site plan doesn't actually have that, councillor. I'm not too sure.
I think we've got approximately 14 points.
So
Yeah, about
14
20
is
total.
the actual fence, but obviously the boundary is much longer than that, accounting for the front setback area.
So what I'm asking is, it's the whole extent of the boundary that overlooks the property then?
No, it's
just a
not the whole
portion of
extent of the boundary,
So-
only a portion.
it? Okay, well, what portion do you think?
I couldn't give you an accurate, oh,
3/4?
maybe about half, wouldn't be more than 3/4.
Half, 3/4. Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions for Ms Biondi? Councillor, sorry, that's right. Deputy Mayor has a question.
Yeah, I've got a question about, you've spoken about planting. Where would the planting actually go? Would it be on the top of the retaining wall?
Yes, so which is actually the client's finished ground level as it currently sits. That's right. And it would sit behind that 1.293 metre high fence for the whole length of that.
And the position of the retaining walls right on the boundary, would it not be possible to move the retaining walls back 1.5 metres?
No, because the retaining wall actually, thank you for the question, the retaining wall actually serves a purpose, which is to retain the property, and it needs to be there in order to retain the pool and all the sand surrounding that pool.
That's true,
Yeah.
but if
So
it was
it's a structural.
So if it was a
Yeah.
smaller pool, you could have a setback to the retaining wall. That is, if we reconstructed this.
Potentially, but I will just note a lot of retaining walls often don't meet the required setbacks because it's often not feasible.
But it would be if you put in a smaller, if your client put in a smaller swimming pool, you could have the 1.5 metre setback, and everybody would be happy because that would meet the deemed to comply provisions. So next question is it right that in places this fence will be 2.7 metres high?
Sorry, what was the question?
Is it right that in some locations, as seen from Simone's side of the fence will be 2.7 metres high, that is retaining wall plus fence?
Thank you, councillor. No, that's not correct. We have designed it so it fits within 2.4 for the entirety of that fence.
Okay,
For those
so
14 and a half metres, it will always sit within that 2.4.
2.4, what's normally the height of a dividing fence in the residential area in Coongamire?
Can be 1.8 and up to 2.4.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions from councillors on this item? No, thank you. And
Thank you very
questions to
much.
staff? Councillor Bowman?
Thank you. To staff, can I have confirmation, please, that the highest point of the retaining wall plus the fence is only 2.4, or is it an average of 2.4 high?
Mr Russell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The question is, are you talking about the fence as it stands, or are you talking about the fence as it's been proposed here to be reduced for an 18 metre long section to 1.295?
The reduced amount, if considered the 1.293 plus the retaining,
Yes.
what is the highest point of those two added together?
That will be 2.4 metres, yes.
Second question is, how are we as a council able to approve this when they can't comply with other legislation, i.e. the pool fence? We heard there they may be able to move the spa or something like that. Shouldn't that not all be part of this consideration?
Through Madam Mayor, the State Administrative Tribunal of Western Australia may well say in dealing with a planning application, you deal with the planning legislation, you leave the building legislation to be dealt with by the building legislation. I don't think we can say categorically that the proponent here cannot comply with the building legislation with respect to the provision of a pool fence. And you've heard some options touted by the applicant's planning consultant.
Further question?
Just follow-up question. Is it right that the boundary of the edge of the spa is approximately 1/2 metre to the boundary fence?
Through Madam Mayor, I don't have those details. I couldn't state that categorically.
So, Madam Mayor, if we can ask for that to be provided to us. And then the second thing would be the retaining wall is how thick, so therefore how close to the internal edge of the boundary wall to the spa is the distance to. Obviously, I understand Mr. Russell won't be able to answer that, but if we can have that provided to, that'd be fantastic. Thanks.
And Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, question through Madam Mayor to Mr. Russell. So how high normally is a fence between two properties? Or what is the approved maximum height?
Madam Mayor, let me be accurate in understanding the question. Is the question commonly out there in the City of Swan what the typical side boundary fence height would be? Is that the question?
Or what are the what's the planning law say? What does local planning scheme say?
Thank you. Through Madam Mayor, as the applicant's planning consultant, Ms Biondi, has pointed out, the exemptions under the city's planning scheme allows side boundary fences that are further than 4.5 metres from a road boundary to be up to 2.4 metres in height without the requirement for planning approval at all.
Any further questions? Are there any further questions from councillors regarding this item to staff? No. Thank everyone for coming tonight for that particular item. And we move on to item 14.3.3, the proposed amendment number 209 to the local planning scheme number 17 to rezone most of lot 9000 Cranwood Crescent via Vash from general to rural to residential development, LPS 17-209. And we have an in-person deputation from Mr. Paz. Is he here? Thank you, Mr. Paz, from Hesperia in support of the officer's recommendation, and you have 3 minutes for your deputation.
Good evening, Mayor Richardson, councillors and city officers. My name is David Paz and I'm from Hesperia, and I'm the development manager for our Rivermark Master Plan community in Vivash, and I wish to speak in support of the recommendation that the city officers have put up in regarding the scheme. As noted, we're proposing to rezone a 10-hectare portion of the former Mill and Brick site from general industrial to residential development. This area is currently a redundant and surplus hardstand area, which is also used for some temporary drainage. Should the city progress the rezoning of the residential to residential development, this will help facilitate our aspirations to transform this scarred landscape, resulting from nearly 50 years of brickworks operations into a vibrant, diverse residential community. Ultimately, our plan is to connect Vivash to the river, provide new local amenity and establish a network of new tree-lined avenues between parklands. The current question regarding the proposed amendment is simple. Does the city want this portion of Vivash to remain as an industrial zoning or have it redeveloped as a high-quality residential estate? Questions around the ultimate subdivision layout form part of an alternative approval, which is also which is also on the agenda tonight. Subsequent to the initial application for the scheme, we can confirm that the Mill and Brick footprint has been rationalised, and any concerns around Kiln 11 have been addressed, as it's now being decommissioned and the infrastructure has now been removed from within the kiln. Ultimately, we view this area as a unique brownfield opportunity where we can create a high-value amenity for the greater community. Our grand vision is to create a market-leading 650-lot subdivision with over 2,000 new trees planted and as many retained mature trees as possible. Rivermark is currently a carbon neutral development, and we also accredited as a under the UDI Urban Development 6 Leaf project and recognised as Water Corporations as Gold Waterwise development. We will also be one of the first fully electrified master plan communities, and by not allowing any reticulated gas into the estate, also mandating solar and providing purchasers with access to subsidised batteries for their homes. As an organisation, and I personally believe we believe in creating inspirational, innovative, and substantial, sustainable places for people to live. By supporting this scheme amendment and rezoning the site from general industrial to a residential development, you will be enabling us to deliver on our vision and the promises we have promised to purchasers. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paz. It was a pretty good timing just there. Do we have any questions from councillors for Mr. Paz regarding this item? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Paz. Yeah, in your deputation, you said you're retaining as many mature trees as possible. Will you not be removing a lot of mature trees on the bond?
Can I reserve that question for as part of the structure plan? That's a detailed element. I can confirm that we, as part of the overall state, we are retaining about 70% of the trees in that area of the mature identified trees.
70% of the trees on the bond?
No, the bund doesn't actually contain that many mature trees. The vegetation on the bund is actually regrowth, and it's only been growing for the last probably 15 years or so. The mature trees are actually located in front of the bund, along Cranwell Crescent, and along the boundary of Jack Williamson Oval as well.
Okay, but the question, I guess my next question relates to the zoning. So if you were going to retain the trees on the bond, and I'm sure there'll be deputations on it later, would you not need to zone the bond as public open space?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please, Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, if we wanted to retain the bond, which has the trees on it, would the bond not have to be, sorry, it's my accent that's probably making this difficult. If we wanted to retain the trees on the bond, would we not have to zone the bond as public open space?
To be able to retain the trees are actually located, the mature trees predominantly are located in front of the bund, and there is always the ability to try and create that as a public open space, but we don't believe the actual physical retention of the bund is necessary to retain the most of the mature trees along Cranwell Crescent and maintaining the current streetscape to existing residents.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further questions from councillors regarding this item for Mr. Paz? No. Are there any questions? You have a question, Councillor Dawn?
Yes, thank you. Thanks very much for that. I noticed that there was some feedback that the vegetation, the fauna assessment was flawed, in fact, that when you had alleged experts go out, that it was not timed correctly, like with bird activity and different wildlife activity. Do you have any comment on that?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I have confirmed that with our consultants in the past. Bear with me that our response to that was probably drafted a few months ago now, but I did confirm the expertise of the environmentalist was appropriate, and the timing of the surveys was appropriate, and there was multiple surveys done for the birds as well, I believe.
And Councillor Catalano, question?
I know we're talking about the rezoning. Are we also talking about the structure plan at this point?
You've got a question for Mr. Paz regarding that?
About the structure plan, yes.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, we will be speaking about the structure plan. So at the moment, in front of this, presented to the city are two agenda items. One's purely relating to the rezoning from general industrial, and then the second one is the structure plan.
So you're coming back again to talk about
yes,
the structure
I am.
plan. All right, thanks.
Thank you. Are there any further questions regarding this item from councillors? No more further questions. Are there any questions from councillors to staff regarding this item?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paz. And we move on to item 14.3.4, proposed Rivermark Area 3, LSP most of lot 9000 Cranwood Crescent, Vivash, Swan, SP 2023/1, page 169. And in-person deputations from Miss Melinda Brackley. She's here. Thanks, Melinda. And I think you're speaking on behalf of Vivash community, is that correct?
Yes.
So I understand that you might go over by
maybe a minute.
Just 1 minute. Okay, thank you.
Just before I start though, can I just give out some pictures? Is that okay?
Thanks.
Just so everyone has an idea of what the bund is. My name is Melinda Brackley. I've lived in Vivash my whole life. I coordinate the Friends of Stuartby Park group. I've spent the last 6 years opposing urban canopy loss in my suburb through successive developments, Pindandamole, Link and now Hesperia. I object to the city's recommendations to approve Hesperia's local structure plan. My objections are in fact supported by the visions, policies and frameworks which are supposed to underpin design and decisions by Hesperia, City of Swan and the Western Australian Planning Commission. The City of Swan is effectively recommending the demolishing of the Earth Bund alongside Cranwood Crescent, which comprises a variety of mature native and non-native trees and shrubs. Where a small suburb and 23 community members objected to the removal of the bunds specifically, citing reasons such as amenity, cooling effects of tree canopy, protection from pollutants associated with neighbouring Midland brick, provision of an environmental corridor for movement of animals, specifically 27 species of native birds which inhabit adjoining Evelyn Reserve, uninterrupted tree canopy for black cockatoos within the black cockatoo distribution range. There's no provision for public open space in the local structure plan. Instead, some underhanded dealings in the form of a retrospective modification to accept a monetary contribution for remediation of Jack Williamson Oval, a City of Swan asset. That was never a part of the agreement to accepting money to assist in the upgrade of the Oval in place of public open space in the subdivision. The community doesn't agree to this being slipped into the local structure plan at all. Hesperia's contribution to remediation was to us, the community, about Hesperia securing a nice entry statement to the greater development, which will eventually be 600 to 700 houses. I also note the 20 to 25 A&E F contour residential density coding modification. Proximity to the flight path requires a density of R20. City of Swan has altered this local structure plan so that an average of R20 density coding as a mix of R10, 20 and R30 is acceptable. Well, if it pleases Hesperia and the City of Swan to suit themselves, how about the community? Hesperia's concern about retaining the bund is purely financial, about not acquiring lot yield to secure profit. Well, then keep the bund and get your lot yield by further manipulating the density coding elsewhere in the greater development. Forgo your lot yield in this area and regain it elsewhere with R30 density amongst the other stages of development which are anticipated to provide a further 600 lots. With Aboriginal descendancy myself, Dundjabarra Mob, Queensland, and open eyes to the conditional engagement that occurs with Indigenous folk, the I-dotting and the T-crossing, I object to the lack of transparency evident in engaging with the Aboriginal elders. Local elders' aspirations, to quote your own document, Hesperia, includes preservation of bushland, but their site visit agenda did not allow visualisation of the bund and its vegetation. The area, very heavily inhabited by Aboriginal people due to proximity to the river, provided a source of hunting, storytelling and camping. This conditional engagement, not unlike the previous area of Hesperia's development, which did not involve acknowledgement of the removal of an Aboriginal artefact scatter site from the DPLH list of recognised sites to allow for bulldozing and building in the first stage. Bushfire risk is a recurring justification for bush removal, and yet state planning policy for bushfire-prone areas, Objective 5.4, says the policy aims to achieve an appropriate balance between bushfire risk and management, environmental protection and landscape amenity, with consideration of potential impacts of climate change. An acceptable bell rating is manageable in Hesperia's development with bund retention through road reserves, easements and housing setbacks. It is all possible. Well then, it seems community aspirations and amenity, public open space provision, R20 average residential density
Sorry
coding.
to interrupt with. Thank you, Melinda. That was the extra minute on the 4 minutes.
That's it. I'm finished.
Pretty good. And thank you very much for those handouts. We're just passing them around now.
No problem.
Are there any questions? Yes, a few questions from Councillor. So, Councillor Bowman.
Thank you for that. You mentioned the mature trees. We heard from the consultant previously, and we'll probably hear again that they're a regrowth. Are they regrowth or mature trees? And then my second question is, I just like big trees, but what's the difference? When does a regrowth become a mature tree?
Oh, well, I can tell you the bund was put there in 1950, and we have state protection of forests that are not as old as that. So, in my opinion, they're mature, and certainly offsets elsewhere by planting 2,000 seedlings is not the same of what's provided by a mature and fully grown canopy. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. So neither you or me would be around in the 1950s. Were they? Do you know if they were planted around then, or do you know when?
Well, the earth bund was put there then, so they were part of the earth bund being put there. The earth bund and the trees were to provide a barrier between the Midland Brickworks and the residents in Vivash.
So would it be reasonable to assume, obviously that's 73 years ago, if it took 20 years before they did anything, those trees would be 50 years old?
Yeah. We had Deputy Mayor question.
Yeah, Mel. The report says trees will be retained, but what's your understanding of what trees will be retained?
Oh, so the bund is not being. This was a bit of a problem with the meet and greet in the morning that Hesperia had down by the river. So all that's being retained is on the people who purchased the land. It's not public open space. It's being retained on their lots. So in actual fact, they can do the hell whatever they want. If they want to put a shed there or whatever, the trees are not protected there. And basically, as it is now, it's the dinky little row of trees between pretty much the dinky little row of trees between the fence and the earth bund. So all of the vegetation on the earth bund, which you see in the pictures, is going.
So if the earth bund was removed, would that remove a lot of the mature trees?
Yes, in my opinion it would. And the amenity, that's what's provided by the tree canopy right the way along the earth bund.
And I think you've got some concerns about the provision of public open space in the subdivision. Can you tell us more about that?
Oh, well, yeah. So somehow it happened. The Jack Williamson Oval thing came to council, and I actually gave a deputation, or at least a submission to support that. The idea was that Hesperia gave an amount of money to the council to develop and remediate Jack Williamson Oval, which is certainly remediable. It was used for Lapathon from my school, Little Athletics. It's definitely remediable. But so what the City of Swan has slipped in as a modification is that they'll accept the contribution, so like a cash in lieu payment for public open space. So no public open space provision in this area, just the monetary contribution to the Oval, which is exactly what I fought and what we were successful. That's how we obtained the Stuart B. Park bike jumps. Because the City of Swan was engaging with the Pindan about taking a cash in lieu payment, and we spoke at the Western Australian Planning Commission and managed to save that as public open space. Now well under a vegetation by the whole community, completely heading towards being remediated.
So I think what you're saying then is that
it's not beyond remediation, and it's something we can all put a bit of elbow grease into, I think, including the City of Swan, instead of undermining the people who want to keep the earth bund, the taxpayers.
The question is that then you're saying that the structure plan should have 10% public open space, and that could include this earth bund.
Well, yeah, with offsets elsewhere. I mean, clearly there's been this modification and this argument about acceptable coding as an average instead of just complying with the R20 that's required under the flight path, which we are. So if that's navigatable like elsewhere, then why can't it be R30 lots be built elsewhere in the development, and then we get to retain the earth bund and Hesperia gets their lot yield.
So what you're saying is people in the community would support that higher density in exchange for retaining the earth bund?
I think in certain places, and also public open space can be acquired elsewhere in the subdivision, in the greater subdivision, okay. and like included, foregone in other areas of the subdivision, which is just all hard stand, and then keep the earth bund.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Ms Brackley from councillors? No? Thank you. No,
Thank
yes,
you.
one from Councillor Dawn.
Thank you. I think it's more of a statement. So do you think if the subdivision was...
Sorry, Councillor Dawn, this is the time where we ask questions of the Deputy.
Sorry, yeah,
So
okay.
that's all right. Thank you. Thanks very much, Melinda. And are there any questions to staff from councillors regarding this item? Oh, not yet. So next speaker we have is Mr Phil Cloran, neither in support or and not in support of the offer of recommendation. Thanks, Phil. We've got 3 minutes for a deputation.
Thanks. This is on behalf of the Blackadder Woodbridge Catchment Group. Our group is concerned about an existing drainage issue in Evelyn Reserve, which is adjacent to the proposed Hesperia subdivision. In around 2021, a new stormwater drain was installed at Muriel Street as part of a residential development known as Vidora Estate. Since then, we have noticed an unprecedented amount of water pooling in the south end of Evelyn Reserve. We mentioned this at a meeting with representatives from Hesperia, and their hydrologist spoke with City of Swan staff and was advised that an apparent error in design or construction prevented the water from being able to flow through the pipe. We raised this with City of Swan staff and were advised that there was no error and the pipe was constructed by the developer in accordance with the design. They basically said a sewer pressure main was in the way and so the pipe had to be higher than it should have been. They said, unfortunately, there isn't an option to lower the pipe. Evelyn Reserve contains a threatened ecological community, or TEC, known as Corymbia calophylla, Xanthorrhoea pricei woodlands and shrublands of the Swan Coastal Plain. This TEC is listed as critically endangered and one of the main threats to it has been identified as hydrological change. In this case, it seems likely that native trees adjacent to the TEC will have their roots submerged for extended periods, which could result in their death. The area most impacted by standing water contains about 40 flooded gum trees and 14 marri trees. Page 7 of the Commonwealth approved conservation advice for this TEC says, prevent impacts to native vegetation, native fauna, hydrology or soil structure from any developments and activities adjacent to or near patches of the ecological community by planning for and appropriately avoiding or mitigating off-site effects. For instance, apply recommended buffers of at least 20 to 50 metres, native vegetation buffers are preferred, around patches of the ecological community and avoid activities that could cause significant hydrological change or eutrophication. While the TEC itself is on slightly higher ground, it is still within 50 metres of the flooded area. The conservation advice says that native vegetation adjacent to the TEC should also be protected, especially within the 50-metre buffer zone. DBCA's submission on the subdivision application included concerns about the impact of hydrological changes on the TEC, but it's not apparent from their submission that they were aware of this drainage issue. It is possible that they only did a desktop assessment. Blackadder Woodbridge Catchment Group have written to DBCA and EPBC compliance to inform them of this issue, and we recommend that the City and Hesperia consult with them to ensure that the Commonwealth Conservation Advice is being followed and that the proposed subdivision will not adversely affect native vegetation, in particular the TEC and trees within the 50-metre buffer. Thank you.
Thank you very much and great timing. Thanks, Mr Cloran. I think we've got some questions from councillors though, if you'd like to come back. I had Councillor Howlett first on screen and then Councillor Catalano.
Thank you, Phil. I think you might have answered my question, but my question is, what do you see as a remedy to the hydrological drainage issues that you've outlined?
Well, I don't know the answer, but I wanted to make sure that the issue was brought to the attention of the council, and because it didn't seem to be referred to in any of the reports or the DBCA submission.
Any further questions, Councillor Howlett? Councillor Catalano.
Thank you. So the water is coming from is proposed. Well, it's coming from the Hesperia site.
At the moment, it's there's stormwater discharged off the Midland Brick area, which is the same site that's proposed for subdivision. So at the moment, it's coming off Midland Brick. In the future, if the subdivision is approved, it'll come off the residential area.
Okay. So how many trees did you say that were affected?
It was about 40 flooded gums and about 14 marries, and these are the ones in the very low-lying area where their roots would probably be submerged for periods of time.
Okay. And have you noticed the pooling of water before?
Only first noticed it last winter and then again this year.
Okay, and what was it like before?
Yeah, the water wasn't pooling there before.
It was flowing.
It just went through the pipe. Yeah, so
Okay.
Under Muriel Street.
Okay then. And it's just to clarify, you consider that the area of pooling is within 50 metres of the TEC, the adjacent TEC?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions from councillors for Mr. Cloran before he goes? Any questions to staff? Thanks, Phil. No questions to... Councillor Catalano?
First off, has DBCA or EP or the compliance team for the EPBC Act, have they been made aware of this pooling within 50 metres of the TEC?
To you, Mr. Russell.
Through Madam Mayor, I'm not certain that anyone from the city has communicated that to the DBCA, but if I understand from Mr. Cloran's deputation, the catchment group has brought that or endeavoured to bring that to the attention of the DBCA themselves.
No, the question was, has the city done it? And do you think you could confirm that the city has or hasn't done that before the next meeting?
I can, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any further questions to staff?
Yes, I do actually have quite a few on this. Another question is regarding, I got a response from the operations manager because I actually wrote an email about this. And I wondered if someone can tell me when the high pressure sewer was put in.
That'd be Mr. Coaten.
I'd have to take that on notice.
Thank you.
Would you be able to email myself that answer before the next meeting, please? So
Yeah, certainly if I can find out before then I certainly will.
Yeah, okay. So, well then, can I assume then that it was installed prior to the downflow pipe off Evelyn Reserve going under the Muriel Street? It was installed before then?
Yes, it would have been.
Okay. So then I don't really understand, so maybe you can help me understand why the downflow pipe under Muriel Street from Evelyn Reserve the new one couldn't have followed the same downflow pipe, and why it had to be made higher so that now we've got pooling because the water doesn't drain off Evelyn Reserve. Can you explain why it couldn't follow the old downflow pipe?
My understanding is it was reconstructed when the downstream, as part of the drainage for the downstream subdivision.
Do you have
I
many
understand
other
that,
questions for Mr.
but
Coaten?
I just don't understand why it couldn't follow the same downflow pipe as what was there before 2021, when that subdivision on the other side of Muriel Street was constructed.
Is that a question for Mr. Coaten, Councillor
Yes, it is a
Catalano?
question for Mr. Coaten, thank you.
Like to get that rephrased again?
I'll provide some information on the changes
Yes,
to the
thank
design
you.
that wasn't necessary, but my understanding is
Yes.
that the pipe had to be realigned as part of the new subdivision. But
Okay.
I'll provide some further information
Thank
to you on that.
Do you
And
have
just
many questions for Mr. Coaten that we could email him
just to
first?
finally confirm, the downflow pipe now off Evelyn Reserve, which is basically going to take stormwater off this new subdivision, is actually now higher than the actual area that the water's going into. So in fact, water is now pooling in what is actually part of a sensitive environmental area.
Well, a condition of of this approval is that that it is subject to the DBCA's satisfaction with the local water management plan and the foreshore management plan. So that would be determined at a later stage in relation to the detail of the drainage.
Okay, and finally, just one question. One further question. What does staff recommend can be done to have this water not pooling around this sensitive environmental area, and rather have the water flowing down into the pipe and away from this area, as DBCA have indicated, they're concerned with the vegetation in the area. What's the solution that can be looked at to have that that water flowing out of that reserve?
There'd be reconstructing the drainage isn't practical. There would be options such as a small pumping system or similar.
Okay, so do you think that we
So
can have
that
some
was
information
another
about
question.
that?
You've already just had another question, so I'm just going to share it around the room, see if there's anyone else, any
We
other
have some-
councillors. Any other councillors have got any other questions for staff at this point? If you do have any more questions, can you please email Mr. Coaten, and I'm sure that the team will get back to you with those questions. Are there any other questions from staff regarding this item, from councillors regarding this item? Yep. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on. The last deputation, in-person deputation, is Mr. Wendy Harkness, not in support of the officer's recommendation. Hi Wendy, we've got 3 minutes for a deputation, thanks.
Go as fast as I can.
That's okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. I'm here to comment on the City staff recommendations regarding the public space within Rivermark Area 3 and the removal of the bond. For a community to develop, there needs to be a small focal points where people can gather and meet through the use of shared space. Developers talk about communities when espousing their plans but often fail to deliver a way neighbours can develop relationships. I've witnessed the importance of this from the use of the green space in Rivermark Stage 2. Families have consistently been using this small park, some from even before the fencing was removed. I have witnessed neighbours who are strangers meeting and forming friendships, which leads to the beginning of a community, all due to the requirement of the 10% open space to be provided in new housing areas. Having a large open space on the other side of the neighbourhood is great, but it is not going to meet the needs of someone who just needs to get their young family outdoors for a quick run. I know from personal experience, if you have young children, it is much easier to be able to duck up the road to a small park than to pack up the required food, drink and sundry items that kids need when you drive or walk across a suburb. The use of the recently opened Pocket Park is testament to that. With the planned development of Stage 3 estimating there will be another 152 residents, which we can assume will bring more young families, to only have this one small pocket park in the middle of Stages 1, 2 and 3, which is already being highly utilised by current residents, is not going to be enough. I do disagree with City staff who dismiss that pocket parks as having little benefit to the community. I am also concerned the Jack Williamson Oval is being claimed by Hesperia as their green space, and it is not new open space. Hesperia agreeing to help fund the upgrade is great, but when is this going to happen and how long will it take? Also, given that the City has already overlooked maintaining this oval in the past, has there been an asset management plan developed to ensure that the area is maintained to a standard that would encourage use by local Vivash and wider community members? Upgrades of assets is a long process. However, requiring Hesperia to provide the small pocket park within the Stage 3 would be of immediate benefit to local families. Regarding the bund, a stand of bushland has grown along here, which has now developed its own environment. The trees give shelter not only to local fauna but also to the houses in the area, and they help reduce the impact of aircraft noise across the suburb. Hesperia claims to pay respect to the landscape, so why are they not retaining the natural corridor that links the wetland on the Cran at Evelyn Reserve with the river? They say they will retain some of the trees along this bund section of the redevelopment. However, most of the trees are actually on the bund and will be felled. Those few trees that remain will be on private land. Are there any restrictions to stop them from clearing by the new owners? Although the bund is man-made, the bushland has been growing there for over 50 years. If we can't save this whole bund, surely some of it. In closing, I implore those elected to the City Council to replace the requirement in Hesperia to provide more pocket parks within Stage 3. It's dismaying to see new estates with no green areas. This is the only chance we have to ensure that there is green open space. And with the bund, I would like to see it stay, but I do ask those who are making the decision to please go and drive to Vivash to stop, look and listen to what it is that is going to be lost if you do not prevent it.
Thank you very,
Thank you for your
much,
time.
Wendy. Do I have any questions from councillors? Councillor Bowman?
Thank you for your deputation. I'm just looking at the one of the pictures that got sent around. And I'm looking at what looks like the bund. Do you think the bund can be removed, but the trees could be kept?
No, I've been walking along it just recently, and there are some areas where some of the bigger trees are on the flat land where they could be safe, but for the most part, no. It's going to devastate the area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from councillors? Thank you very much for your deputation. Are there any questions from councillors to staff regarding this item? No? Thank you very much for your deputations. And then we move on to, we still have an in-person deputation from Mr David Paz regarding the Hesperia in support of the officer's recommendation. We have another 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr Paz.
Good afternoon again, City Council officers and councillors. Again, David Patterson here from Hesperia, the Development Manager for the Rivermark. And again, we support the recommendations from the officer to support our structure plan for Area 3 of Rivermark. Generally, our approach to the master plan community as the overall community has been driven by a landscape-driven design approach, focusing on tree retentions where we can, enhancing the surrounding area and creating and having consideration for high amenity areas. Strong feedback has been received from both the city and the community about retaining trees, and we have done what we can to retain trees. As part of the detailed design, we have identified and committed to retaining 70% of the mature trees identified in Area 3. A significant proportion of the mature trees along Cranwell Crescent are located in front of the redundant earth bund. The project team has identified a unique solution to create a lifestyle lot exceeding 1,000 square metres, which allows the creation of tree protection zones by protecting the retained mature trees long term. We view this as a win-win solution, as we can retain a significant portion of trees along Cranwell Crescent and generally maintaining the existing streetscape to existing residents. The earth bund behind the mature trees along Cranwell Crescent is 5 metres high and has very steep slopes. The project team has considered the retention of the bund, but due to the accessibility issues as a POS space, a fall risk if people climb it, ongoing maintenance issues for the city if handed over, and a large physical barrier between the new and old Vash community, which also then creates a restriction for pedestrian access to the future Jack Williamson Oval. We don't see a scenario whereby good or sound urban development outcomes can be achieved by retaining the bund. We also believe there's more important consideration. It's more important consideration the greater community needs as a whole, and why we are pursuing the upgrade Jack Williamson Oval in partnership with the city. Despite Area 3 in isolation not having any POS, we believe our 2.15 cash contribution to upgrade Jack Williamson Oval would deliver a superior outcome for the community than keeping a small portion of the bund. We are keen to also progress these works with our Area 3 works in 2024. We also wish to stress, in addition to the Jack Williamson Oval contribution, we are also intending to deliver a future POS, which is to the greater estate, which includes activation of the foreshore and protection of high-value vegetation in Area 4, which is immediately north to the area, and we will still comply with our overall greater 10% requirement of POS for the overall estate. Ultimately, we desire to deliver a high amenity, sustainable master plan community, and we seek your support of the Area 3 structure plan to deliver our vision. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions from councillors? I have quite a few hands up, so we'll just get Councillor Bowman.
Thank you. You touched on your contribution to Jack Williamson Oval. Was it your understanding that by contributing you'd get a reduction in the public open space requirement?
We actually, it's the way it's being, we've subdivided the process, and to try and progress the our subdivision. We've split out the rezoning and structure planning of different areas. Ultimately, what we're seeking to do is to provide 10% over the greater estate. Unfortunately, the current area that we're proposing in the zone doesn't have the preferred amenity with the higher quality vegetation, which we have some TC and bushland protected to the north, and also we want to activate the foreshore as a community for the community. We are going to deliver 10% overall, and what we're saying is that we are providing a 2.15 contribution in partnership with the city. And what the city hasn't actually said that we're actually acting as a cash in lieu, but it's sort of a cash in lieu because we actually are trying to activate the POS, but we're still delivering 10% overall once we finalise the project.
So the overall 10%, does that include the Jack Williamson Oval space?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. My next question, and I've asked it before, but I'll ask of you. The trees on the bund, you mentioned in your previous deputation that they were regrowth. Have they been there for more than 50 years?
So the trees along the front of the bund have been there since about the 70s, planted in the early 70s, based on the aerial photography. There's photography from the 60s, late 60s, and then there's photography in the mid 70s. So it's in and around that time where that vegetation was seems to be planted. The vegetation on the bund seems to be taking form towards early 2000s, based on the historical evidence of what's been going on. But I think that's more from like regrowth or seedling droppings, and there's quite a large amount of weeds across the bund as well.
And final question, what guarantees can you put in place for those trees to be saved when they become part of a individual's private quarter-acre property block?
Yeah, so our intent is to create a local development plan over that section of the site, which then creates what we're calling as a tree protection area. And within that, there'll be controls under the LDP, local development plan, that will prevent trees being removed without the consent of the city. I will also be lobbying the city to look at other policies they can implement down the track, to where there are better controls for vegetation in private lots. We also will be putting design guidelines in place, which will also then control the outcomes for those lots, which will mandate those trees are retained, other than potentially for like safety reasons.
Okay. And so you said before that you go and retain 70% of the trees. Would you agree that for some of those lots, when people put their nice 6 metre or 3 metre wide driveway in, they're going to have to remove trees as well?
Yeah, I've allowed for removal of some of the trees to allow for crossovers, and we'll mandate the location of the crossovers based on the minimal impact of removal of the trees.
Okay,
We'll
so-
probably also narrow the crossovers to 3 or 4 metres, where to ensure that minimal trees are removed in that front section of those lots.
So that's the crossovers, but would you agree that for people who are going to build their houses on those lots at the back, trees apparently protected at the front, that for some of those lots, trees are going to also have to be cut down by the new owners to have a driveway to their property?
So the intent is, once we remove the bund, there's no vegetation to be able to retain on top of the bund, and the bund's up to 5 metres high. So we're literally lobbing the top of the bund off, and then at that point, behind where the bund is then levelled, that's where the lot owners will be able to build on their lots, and the stuff in front will be all protected.
We had Councillor Dora. You both get so.
Thanks very much. They're 50-year-old trees there, and this is a threatened ecological community that you want to just bulldoze down and chop the top off and then fill in and flatten. Is that right? Why can you...
Councillor Dora, you just asked a question, but you didn't allow
Sorry about that.
to ask.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. That's all right. Thank you, Councillor.
Why? Sorry, I haven't asked my question.
But you did ask him a partial. Is that you did ask him a question?
All right. I can add to it.
No worries. I'll answer the first part of the question, Councillor.
Okay, thanks.
The TEC vegetation I referred to earlier is actually not located in Area 3. It's located in a section immediately north of the proposed rezoning and structure plan area. And we want to focus down the track and protect that area long term, because that vegetation is native and is in regrowth. And so our intention is to protect what was classified as high-grade vegetation, and so we're focusing on retaining that. So the trees along the front on Cranwell Crescent aren't TEC considered tree or threatened trees.
Just my last question. With your subdivision, why could you not have retained the entire bund and created a subdivision around what's actually existing?
So the bund itself is quite a significant portion of the site. So it does take 35% of our site away, and would also then significantly impact what we can deliver and how we deliver it. But we also mainly believe that it creates a physical barrier between the old and new residential areas. We don't want to create a divide between the new and old. We also believe that maintenance of a bund like this would be problematic for the city. The city's officers had earlier discussed with us that a linear park it wouldn't be desirable, and even more so a bund which you can barely climb up on. And I've personally fallen and twisted my ankle on it, so I know how steep it is. That you can't maintain that kind of vegetation for bushfire also risks, and as I think I mentioned as well. And then obviously the public liability issues and responsibilities if the city would take something like that on.
Do you have a further question for Mr. Paz? Councillor Catalano?
Yes, thank you. Working, is it?
Sorry,
Oh, that's okay. Just regarding the discharge of the stormwater from the Hesperia subdivision into Evelyn Reserve, the environmentally sensitive City of Swan asset, is there any way that Hesperia can discharge the stormwater into the Blackadder Creek, which is, on the other side of the reserve, without having it end up pooling in the Evelyn Reserve?
Thank you, Councillor. Let me have a quick think about this. So are you saying that we discharge our stormwater to the other side of Muriel Road and it, past the subdivision, or not to discharge it into the immediate area adjoining our subdivision?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm concerned about the environmentally sensitive, community of plants, these trees and these other plants that are in there that are going to be basically flooded because, there's a downpipe now that's higher than the lay of the land. And the thing is that the Hesperia water is going to discharge into that area now, and it's going to cause, damage, and probably the trees are going to end up dying. So is there any way that Hesperia could actually discharge the water into the creek without having to go and discharge that water into Evelyn Reserve?
Thank you, Councillor. I'll probably take part of that on notice, and I'm happy to send all the councillors a response to exactly that matter. What I'd like to stipulate is that as part of the LWMS that we put forward, we've actually stated that our groundwater into the tributary, which is a current discharge, a legal discharge point for our site, will be our flows in and out of the tributary are going to be maintained the same. Actually, they were slightly lower, and we've been requested to increase them to maintain the same flows. And we're also looking at putting biofiltration systems in to improve the quality of the water. Now, the issue at hand has been caused by an alternative developer, but we're happy to work for the city, and I already have spoken to some of the city engineers, and we've offered some of our services and our consultants at our costs, even though technically it's not our issue, to assist with this matter. And I'm happy to work through with the city and update the council on how this is resolved. But ultimately, we have a discharge point of water which we've always been entitled to do, and things from outside of our control and third-party approvals have created potentially an issue. We are in the process of actually we've had it surveyed. They missed the couple of trees that were in question, and I've been advised by the tributary group which ones to be picked up. So we are picking up those trees again all at our costs, and we'll try and ascertain the exact impact of what the impact of the drainage being higher than the lower point. Thank you.
Another further question?
Yeah, I mean, are you aware of whether? I mean, I read the report, and DBCA, are concerned about not enough water going in. But does DBCA? I mean, have you told DBCA that actually the stormwater that's going to go into the Evelyn Reserve is in fact going to pool and damage vegetation? Have you told them that?
I haven't advised them personally of that yet,
So
but we actually don't know the full extent of the flooding, so that's why we've actually picked up all the survey information and I want to present an accurate presentation of what the actual issues are at hand.
Okay, but you do
Our
recognise
intent
that
will be,
there-
yeah, and we'll be discussing this with the city.
And you recognise that there is actually pooling in there, and it's considerable pooling.
I acknowledge that the
Yeah.
invert level of the inlet and versus the discharge part is higher than what would have been I would have done personally. But I can't. Again, these are items that outside of our remit on to be able to progress our subdivision.
Councillor Howlett, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, David. In your deputation, you said towards the end that there are more important things than the bund. And I'm just wondering what you would think that they are, considering that 23 of the 29 public submissions were all listing the bund as very important. So what is more important things than the bund, please?
Of my personal belief, we believe the actual upgrade of Jack Williamson Oval is more important. We also believe that activating the foreshore for the use by the public is more important, and we also deem that the vegetation by qualified environmentalists, I can't remember the word for the guys that do the flora and fauna pickups for us, have identified the TEC lands in this enormous section of our site, which we also retain. And we want to activate all of that and protect all of that, and that will form part of our overall 10% of our POS. So not protecting regrowth, and actually protect native vegetation and activate a foreshore, and then also reactivate a derelict oval for the great community. So instead of having a linear inaccessible bit of vegetation, actually have a physical playing ground with physical oval with amenities, parking, also toilets, barbecue area, playgrounds. I think is better value to the greater community. Obviously, there's always going to be opposition, and people are entitled to have different opinions to what we think. But we're using industry experts and leading people in their field to design what we believe it will be a very, very good, sustainable estate.
Are there any further
Okay, and
questions from councillors on this?
Just further, sorry, one more question, if I may, Mayor. Do you recognise that community is more than just human beings, that we do have an ecological community to protect and to cater for? And whilst barbecues and lawn and ovals are pleasant for humans, wildlife requires bush and diversity and established trees, which help to make part of our community as a whole. Do you acknowledge that, please?
I do acknowledge that, and that's why our design response in our subdivision originally did not accommodate for the retention of the trees on Cranwell Crescent, and we've altered our subdivision layout to accommodate the trees along Cranwell Crescent, and we also identify that the important flora and fauna is located and the linkages to the river are located elsewhere on the site, and we deem to protect those because that's where the ecological communities is of the greatest importance to protect.
Thank you.
Any further questions? I've got a question from Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I've got a question. Have you done a quantitative survey of the mature trees on the Earth Bund?
Not to my acknowledgement. I've only been the development manager on this project for the last year. Our previous development manager quit, so I've picked up the reins. So I don't believe so. I'm happy to check and come back and confirm.
So how would you know then that 70% of the mature trees are not on the bund?
So we've done a tree survey of the site.
All right. Well, that's what I meant.
Sorry, I think meant quantified as a dollar value.
Have you actually gone in and measured the trees and said,
yeah,
this is
so
a tree of 50 centimetres diameter trunk, and therefore it's a mature tree, and it's on the bund, Earth Bund, or not on the Earth Bund?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. You're testing me on the environmental component. I believe a mature tree is actually considered, I think, 300 mils in diameter, and I think that's what the basis on which we've picked up our surveys. And that's how we've approached it. Sorry, I apologise again of what you meant to quantify in terms of monetary value. But no, we have actually physically got survey of the trees in and around the Oval Area 3.
So have we actually got survey in the structure plan, or is it an appendix? Is it available to councillors?
I believe it's in the structure plan, but I'm happy to circulate it.
Okay. Next question. In Area 3, which is what we're talking about now, what is the percentage of public open space?
We agreed with the city's officers to, we had a small portion of what we considered as a POS drainage thing, but we've agreed to have that as 0. So therefore, to avoid any kind of complications or issues in terms of what has been classified. So as mentioned in my deputation, currently we've got 0, but we will have 10% once we're fully developed for the whole entire state.
So in Area 3, there is 0% public open space?
Correct.
Okay, so therefore it would be possible to retain some of the earth bund as public open space to get to the 10%.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. There's always an opportunity to do something, but we strongly believe that that's not the best urban outcome. And we also believe, while we're focusing, that while we are progressing the Area 3, we also want to progress very quickly the remediation and upgrade of Jack Williamson Oval, and that will alleviate any kind of needs for the community. So at the moment, I acknowledge that the community are already using the small pocket park that we use, but we've also only got 2 residents from our current subdivision that are residing in our state. So we believe that we are trying to consider the greater community when we're saying we want to activate Jack Williamson Oval and then also the foreshore and protect the TEC versus retaining a man-made bund which was there to create a separation from a brickworks which is now no longer there.
Well, you can see that your development would likely be welcomed more wholeheartedly by the community if the earth bund or a portion of the earth bund was retained to provide that 10% open space.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I acknowledge that there is some opposition to it, but 23 or 29 people that responded don't represent the full community, and there are members of the public have expressed their happiness of us upgrading Jack Williamson Oval and remediating the area from a currently industrial use to a residential state, and they've also acknowledged the great job we've done in opening up Appleman Road, retaining all our trees, also retaining trees in our current subdivision. So as much as there's people against it, there's also people for it. They just haven't presented a deputation or submitted submissions to council. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I just want to finish up by acknowledging the opening up of Evelyn Road is quite important, and Jack Williamson Oval being turned back into a park will be a great thing. Thank you.
Okay, are there any final questions from councillors regarding this item? Are there any questions from councillors to staff regarding this item?
Thank you.
Okay. I thank Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, I've got a question. Could the city staff provide us with that environmental tree survey of the earth bund so we can get a look at it? Because I'm not sure we've got it in the structure plan. Is it an appendix? Or can you tell us what pages is on the structure plan?
Mr. Russell.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll have a look to see whether it's one of the technical appendices that haven't been circulated and aren't normally circulated to councillors. If it is, I can arrange to have it circulated to all councillors before next week.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from councillors to staff regarding this item? If not, I thank everyone for their deputations there. At this point, I'd really like to acknowledge those in the gallery and the staff and councillors. I know this has been a slightly longer agenda with a lot of planning issues, and I really thank you for your patience. We're going to move on to item 14.35, proposed amendment number 223 to local planning scheme number 17 to modify the land uses allowed in precinct number 2 of the Rosehill Waters special use zone number 24, parts of lots 200 and 9002 West Parade, South Guildford, LPS 17 223 on page 236. And we have an in-person deputation from Craig Benprouth on behalf of the South Guildford Community Association, not in support of the officer's recommendation. Welcome, Craig, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening, everyone. You've all seen me here many times before, and strangely, I've never asked for anything. All I've tried to achieve is that the due care, responsibility and common sense prevail in trying to keep the Rosehill structural plan as close as possible to the original one dated 2015. The best parts of the estate are a result of great structural plan that has forced the developer to undertake certain obligations, including the worst parts of the estate are a result of deviations from that original structural plan, including the removal of the freshwater bore for gardening and landscaping, removal of the retirement village replaced by high-density homes, removal of stables, removal of lodge, over-demand on the infrastructure and facilities, the worst being the huge traffic issues at the Queens Road and Great Eastern Highway. Lower ratios of parks and recreation to the developed areas to what was initially agreed, and now the removal of even more trees. From the beginning, I've also advocated that the noise levels are too high for residential development in previous zoned rural areas, as have Perth airports. The developer initially submitted a noise report prepared by its own expert, Herring Storer, conceding that the results agreed with the old Perth Airport ANEF noise contours, meaning that the areas were too noisy to support urban development. Yet, a few years later, exactly the same results are used to demonstrate compliance with the new 2020 ANEF contours. How can this be? Town planning have unfortunately failed to identify this inconsistency. Please remember that over and over again, Perth airports have also encouraged the City of Swan to take into account other noise metrics when considering the development and apply the National Airport Safeguarding Framework, guidelines relating to aircraft noise as part of the decision making. In addition, Perth airports have stated that based on their current N65 and above contours, the site would be experiencing 100 to 200 aircraft movements a day, which is almost 4 times what it should be. In fact, from the developer's own test results submitted, these are above 80 decibels. The noise levels and frequencies of these are higher than what is suitable for residential development, even with noise attenuation. The worst comment I've received from town planning, of which there were a few, was improving traffic flow at Queens Road and Great Eastern Bypass was not a requirement for a satisfactory upgrade. This is what was stated before the development even started and was the reason for Clause 4 stating that before development of Stage 4, 5 or 6, this had to be satisfactory. I just ask that the City councillors do what they can to ensure the public is heard properly and to prevent town planning and WAPC from making the incorrect decisions for the benefit of the developer at the expense of so many and the South Guildford community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pemberth. Have any questions from councillors regarding this item? No questions for Mr. Benprath. Any other questions for staff from councillors? Councillor Catalano? Oh, sorry.
So the latest development application, or whatever you want to call it, that's before us at the moment, how different is that from the original structure plan?
The original structural plan was very detailed in a lot of areas, including where development could happen, which trees could be removed, which areas were allocated to what. It was very, very specific, and so many of these parts of this original plan have actually been removed and taken away. I mean, you've had so many applications. Even today, there's 2, and I'm not even sure I'm deputising against the right officer's recommendation. There's so many. It just gets worse and worse. And what I'm thinking is that, really town planning should get even an extra person just to go through the original plan, the 2015 plan, and to see what has changed. The developer has been here so many times giving excuses for why he has to do things, yet it's only for one reason. It's simply to get as much land and sell as much land as possible.
Yeah. But what I was asking though is this amendment in line with the original structure plan in your view?
No, it's not. These are all additional. These are all additional.
And what was in the original structure plan? Do you remember for this particular area?
The original structure plan had areas zoned as rural because of high noise levels, and also to try and maintain levels of recreational and parkland in relation to the amount of developed land. These have all been exceeded, causing the issues.
Okay, so the area south of... Yeah, okay, that's fine. All right, thanks for that. Yeah. So you've basically lost public open space from the original subdivision or the original structure.
Oh, quite a lot, and even Murray-Lena would explain that in a little bit more detail.
That's fine, thank you. Thank you.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Benprath? from councillors? No. Any councillor questions to staff regarding this item? Yes. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, a question through you, Madam Mayor, to Mr. Russell. Just looking at the actual proposed amendment, section 3 on page 3 of the scheme amendment report provided by Rosehill Waters. It shows the precinct boundary for the special use signs. So it shows the current and the proposed. I just want to ask, is the significant reduction in this special use zone, which is for club premises, community purpose, exhibition centre, etc., has that solely been triggered by the reduction in the ANEF contours, so the reduction in aircraft noise? So therefore the developer is able to increase the amount of residential development as the noise is now less reduced.
Mr. Russell?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, is the question as to the amendment here? I think there's a bit of confusion between these two items. If you'll allow me to explain, I think it might be a benefit for everyone. This item is on the amendment to the scheme provisions in relation to the uses you can have in Precinct 2. It is the next item, which is the structure plan amendment, that changes the delineation of Precinct 2 in the structure plan. So this, if that is of assistance, so yes, the delineation, the changes to Precinct 2 in this amendment, as they are for the changes to the structure plan, are coming about largely as a result of, yes, changes to the aircraft noise contours that have taken place since the original structure plan was adopted, and also modifications to the area of Precinct 2 arising from the land swap, which is reflected in this adjustment to the scheme provisions in the precinct. So if that explains it, so that is the fundamental changes in both instruments, the land swap and the impact of changes to the aircraft noise, and that affects both items.
Further question?
Do you happen to know, Mr. Russell, what the reduction in the area of this zone 2 is? Precinct 2. So I'm looking again at page 3 in the proposed amendment number 223. So this is the PDF that you sent out, I think yesterday, because it looks quite a significant reduction in the area of the special use zone, which is intended to provide facilities for people in the area. Looks to me like it's about.
Can you ask that question clearly to Mr. Russell that you're after? Oh, okay. Would you like to use this one?
Again, just looking at page 3 of the proposed amendment, the map clearly shows. I'm on. This is a supplementary document that was sent out, which is the scheme amendment. So that was sent out yesterday. So because we don't have sufficient, the report, the agenda did not include this. So I'm looking at page 104 of the document that was sent out. It's page 3 of the scheme amendment. On page 3, it shows figure 2, precinct boundary for special use zone 24, and it shows precinct 2 reducing in size significantly. So it looks like it's reduced in size to about a third of the previous size. So is that correct, Mr. Russell?
That is correct, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from councillors to staff regarding this item? No? Thank you, Mr. Russell. Okay. If there's no further questions, then we'll move on to item 14.3.6, amendment number, on to 14.4. Oh, we're going to go back, sorry. We're going to keep, well, are we going to break or not? We'll just keep going. So 14.3.6, amendment to number 2, the Rose Hill Water Structure Plan, parts of lot 82, lot 200 and lot 9002, West Parade, South Guildford, Swan SP 2015, 3B, page 244. And we have in-person deputations from Dr. Steve Benson, not in support of the officer recommendation. Thank you, Dr. Benson, and you have 3 minutes.
Madam Mayor, councillors, I'm more than 35 years in academia and consulting. I have extensive expertise in research methodology, survey design and statistics. The methodology used by the City of Swan to try and assess public opinion was fundamentally flawed. 662 letters went out. 62 submissions were received. Many of those submissions were made by people who did not get a letter. So the actual response rate was about 4%. Now that is statistically not very significant. I interviewed people to find out why the response rate was low. The letter reads like a done deal. It's difficult to understand. No maps or plans were included in the letter. No stamped addressed envelope to make answering easy. Detailed information was difficult to access. Lots of letters were sent to addresses that would not be affected. More than 100 characters were required to type in to make a response, and no QR code was provided. The confirmation bias in it, silence meant to signify approval. The geographic distribution, which is meant to be based on distance, was not very fair or representative. 26 letters north of the river, the remainder south. Elderly, infirm, those without internet obviously excluded. The information that was available was out of date, low definition, concept only, and largely incomplete. The change of use, and I was amazed that the City of Swan didn't tell us about the change of use application, was not included. It allows the developer to build hotel, motel, whatever. That's what they're asking for. Many people would object to that. It was not mentioned. Posters were put on West Parade only. If they're going to be used, they should be used fairly. We need a better datum point. The data acquisition is fundamentally flawed. The report which relies on that is also flawed, and it relies on cherry picking. Lots of editing. All the comments that people made about the change of use were excluded from the schedule in the report there. There was one note about public concern with the potential of noise from the development in area P2, and the report says it would be managed in detail at a subsequent development application stage. In the interest of efficiency, the council should make views known now so that people don't engage in unnecessary work. It looks like a lot of time and money has been spent on a consultation process that is woefully inadequate. It looks like it was deliberately designed to produce a favourable result for the developer. I'm assuming that the City of Swan is not complicit, but I have to ask, why is this survey so badly designed and executed? It needs to be done again, and it needs to be done properly, because we need to make sure we reflect community opinion accurately and fairly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Benson. Are there any questions from councillors to Dr. Benson? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, Dr. Benson, yeah. Can you elaborate a bit more on your concern about noise? Where do you think the noise would come from?
Well, the most likely position for pub club is area P2. We know nothing about the final foreshore development plan, and the noise from that. If I centre a datum point there and use that to calculate a fair geographic distribution of letter distribution, then I get a very different result. Many more people on the north side of the river who may be opposed but have not had the chance to say so would be involved. As it is now, we've got 26 people in Helena Street. It's a very, very restricted sample.
So what you're concerned about is that noise from, say, the amphitheatre, which, councillors, you can see on page 44 of the Environmental Assessment Report.
Well, I have many other concerns. I was restricting it just to that, the methodology. It's failed in its purpose. It needs to be done properly.
So that noise could potentially find its way across the Helena River and into Guildford itself.
Well,
where you live.
Definitely. And from the old days when they used to hold conferences in the at the golf club, the noise that came through as far as Great Eastern Highway was significant.
Are there any further questions for Dr. Benson? No, any questions from councillors to staff? No? Thank you very much, Mr. Benson, Dr. Benson. And then we have an in-person deputation from Mr. Tony Perrin from Urbis in support of the officer's recommendation. Thanks, Tony, and you have 3 minutes for your deputation.
Thank you. Good evening. Do I have to push it or we're going? Yep, okay. Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor and fellow councillors. As many of you know, in the middle of last year, a comprehensive MRS amendment advertising process occurred via the Department of Planning, which involved full public disclosure of the proposed structure plan amendment for the Rosehill Lodge precinct and the lands north of West Parade. This included full clarity of reports, master plan, traffic modelling, lot density, along with conceptual plans for a hospitality precinct at the Rosehill Lodge to help support its restoration and provide a complementary set of land uses to the existing retail activities at the Waterhall Retail Centre. As part of the Department consultation process, the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation requested that additional portions of the foreshore land be placed into the hands of the City of Swan for long-term management. The result of this advertising process saw over 110 people, 71% of all submissions, largely from the South Guildford community, support the proposal and proposed master plan design. This led to the WA Planning Commission and the Minister for Planning approving the urban rezoning and adjustments to the foreshore reserve earlier this year. The community's 71% support for the proposal was a strong recognition of the efforts that were evident in the master plan to help manage traffic speeds along West Parade, retain old and unique trees around the lodge, maintain significant trees in the design where possible, and plant new quality tree-lined streets for the future. It also validated support for the strong planned linkages for the many residents in South Guildford who live south of West Parade, providing them with pathway networks and easy direct access to the Helena Foreshore Reserve. We have never sought to grab land, simply to accommodate logical rationalisation of the foreshore boundary in the best interests of management between the Department of Planning and the City of Swan, and at the same time preserve trees and creekline, add suitable planting, pathway networks, seating, etc., and try through best design practice to encourage recreational exercise in the Helena Foreshore Reserve to experience the special natural environment that exists. Through this structure plan advertising process, assertions have been made that we are removing fauna habitat. In fact, what's happening is we're preserving 140 existing trees on our lands, and all trees adjacent to the creekline and the Foreshore Reserve. Planting 180 new street trees in the roadways, 19 new trees in the parks, and each resident will provide an additional 132 under the BCA requirements when they lodge their house plans. We will be adding additional planting to creek lines to assist with nutrient stripping, removing weeds and typha, and respectfully integrating the public open space that needs to be created at the old driving range creek line. Finally, I ask that you take time to look at the plan, see through the clutter of misinformation like the local community did last year.
Thank you,
bring
Mr.
alignment.
Perrin. That's your 3 minutes. Councillors, any questions for Mr. Perrin? No questions for Mr. Perrin. Thank you very much, Mr. Perrin. Councillors, any questions to staff regarding this item? No questions? Thank you very much for your deputation. I'd also just like to share that South Guildford Association and Lower Helena Association were not in support of the officer's recommendation and submitted a written deputation. Councillors and those in the gallery, we have one more item, 14.4.1, food organics and garden organics for FOGO, a 3-bin curbside collection system rollout on page 326. And we have written deputations from the Gidgegannup Progress Association Incorporated, not in support of the officer's recommendation.
Question of staff.
That was the written deputation. Question, Councillor Henderson?
Yes, question of staff on that. In regard to the contract with the EMRC to provide the FOGO material, if we were to remove the Gidgegannup area from the FOGO program, would that have any impact on the proposed contract with the EMRC?
A question for you, Mr. Coden.
The contract allows the city to provide the predicted volumes building up over a number of years. So we're not committed to a certain amount of volume, but we are committed to taking all of our FOGO to the EMRC.
So to be clear, what we decide to collect is what we would send to the MRC, and we could exclude Gidgegannup.
Under the terms of the contract, yes.
Are there any other questions, Councillor Doran?
Just to add to that, so is there an option to actually opt out of the system at all? We talked about this before. Is there any, without it
Mr. Gogan?
impacting the contract that you have with EMRC?
The city, the state government has mandated that the city will, all local governments have to be part of FOGO, have to provide the FOGO service. Some local governments don't provide it for all areas. I certainly wouldn't recommend an opt-in, opt-out service for the community. It makes it very operationally possible to manage.
Any further questions? Are there any further questions from, Councillor Henderson?
Sorry, in regard to the opt-in, opt-out, I just want to be clear, we could opt out a particular area such as Gidgegannup, yes?
That would be possible to do, to opt out of rural areas, and some local governments have done that.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, and following on from that, the very high density group dwellings in areas like Midland, presumably they could also opt out of it as well if they're not going to be producing a lot of garden organic.
Well, I'd probably say up front, these questions aren't sort of the issue relating to the report is should we sign the agreement with EMRC or not. We're getting into questions of implementation, but I will answer that one. So in relation to the medium density and higher density, we're intending to work with the individual strata managers on arrangements in each area. And it depends, a lot of it, without wanting to go into too much detail, a lot of it depends on the truck runs as well, because if we've got FOGO trucks going past multi-unit developments and we're not collecting those, if we've got to send a truck specifically to collect the general refuse each week rather than each fortnight, it makes it very expensive for the community to bear. So there's a lot of operational issues to be sorted out, but the report before council tonight is should we sign the agreement with EMRC or not.
We can take a break now, or we can answer the questions. Have
I'll
you
just ask on the FOGO.
Thank you.
So with the FOGO, are there any other local government authorities that have done opt-out schemes other than for rural?
Mr. Guyton.
Is there any way that you could find
Oh,
us
just a
find
moment.
out?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, and through the chair, when the City of Fremantle introduced their service there, they didn't initially introduce it for multi-unit developments. So there's a capacity to deal with it as we intend to do with single unit develops firstly, and then come back and look at multi-unit develops as a secondary stage. We just need to consider, as Mr. Coaten did, how we manage their waste. So if they're not going to get a weekly waste collection, that's a significant change for them.
Just another question though, on this opt-out. I mean, is council going to know if an opt-out scheme is on the table, and are they going to have any input into whether an opt-out scheme is actually proposed and whether we can vote on it?
So through the chair, as I said, this issue is about the contract first. The challenge is the state government requires a uniform system of waste management to be applied. So the Better Bins funding which we have requires a uniform provision of the service. If we start saying we're to exclude this or exclude that, it potentially affects the funding. It may also affect future taxation we get where product goes to other sources if it's deemed not to have removed the organic fraction. So some of this is going to be by experiment as we gradually develop it. And that's why we've suggested a staged approach for taking this over a number of multiple areas and learning as we go.
Okay, are there any further questions from staff? That's it. Okay. We are now going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll resume at 8:26. Welcome back, everyone, to 6.3, councillor questions in regard to items on the agenda. Just going to work around the room, and if any councillors have any questions, could you please indicate them to staff? Councillor Catalano, any questions? No. Councillor Doran? Councillor Singh? Councillor Bowman?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. 14.5.3, change in basis of valuation. What is the new cost that the city gets charged if we ask for a GRV?
Through the chair, I'll have to take that on notice.
My next question, Madam Mayor, is I submitted a number of changes or suggestions for the annual report. Some of them were because of non-compliance, some of them because I just didn't like them, and some of them I thought made better. How will we know what changes have been put in prior to Wednesday's council meeting? Will I get a response on what's been suggested be included? Will we get an updated draft annual report?
Thank you, Ms Pickering.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we will provide all councillors with the next version of the annual report, with also a summary of the changes that have been made to that.
And a follow-up question to that, so I don't have to go through the whole annual report again, all 153 pages. Will I get told on each one of my points that I raised whether it's been changed or not, or been modified?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes, we can do that.
And my other question is on 16.1, so I'll let you know, tell me how you want me to ask that question, Madam Mayor.
You can just ask your question and I'll ask staff. So
It's a confidential report.
then we can move to that in a moment. Can we go on to Councillor Jones and come back to that one? Any questions? Thank you. Councillor Miles, Councillor Knight, Councillor Zanino and Councillor Henderson.
Yes, in regard to matters to withdraw or just questions in general?
Questions. Got a question?
But there's a matter that I would like to withdraw for the meeting, so.
Sorry?
There's a matter that I'd like to withdraw for the meeting next week.
Okay. So any other questions of staff? Okay, and then we need a motion to go behind closed.
that's me.
Sorry. Questions from Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, I've got a question about the targeted underground power project, which I do have an impartiality interest in, councillor. So, what the report?
Council's got financial interests in that too.
Yeah, we do.
Did it go behind closed doors then?
They'll need to leave if we're going to start questioning them.
Yeah, they'll have to leave.
Yep. Okay, so those who have an interest in that item, financial or to be, is that it for Midland?
Councillor Dawn, if you do it for financial one, you need to lodge that and write it
Councillor
to
Knight
us.
impacted by that?
We'll catch you at the end. We'll catch you at the end if you want to catch that now.
I've actually sold my house in Midland, so I won't be having a conflict of interest going forward. It settles on the 20th.
Still living there though?
Are you still living there, Councillor Knight?
Councillor Knight?
I still live there.
You have,
a proximity interest based on the area.
Okay.
And can you just make sure you get the interest form into us?
Anybody else?
Question.
Question, Councillor Harlett, that would be.
Thank you. I need to lodge a proximity interest, but I will need to do that electronically. So just letting that verbally known that I'll be making that arrangement prior to the next meeting. I'll have it lodged.
And then will you sign out then for this section or mute that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, I'm happy to sign out. So just tell me when to do
message
so.
you. Thank you. Okay, so no one else with a proximity or a financial interest in the area? Okay. For those watching online, we're going to go into a confidential section now. And we're going to. Okay. All right.
It's the top item.
Okay.
All right, I think we're safe to proceed now. So, just to reiterate, councillors, I don't live in Midland. My impartiality interest is as a result of my work at Western Power as an IT consultant. So that's an impartiality interest and not any other kind of interest. So I can ask the question. My question really relates to the cost per property in Midland and Woodbridge. So on page 345 of the agenda report, it says the total cost per property in Midland is estimated between 1,768 and 3,283. And that is an awful lot of money in one hit for people in Midland and Woodbridge. And even if spread over 10 years, it's potentially could be, it's a lot of money. But I note that it says on page 348 of the recommendation that we're endorsing this, authorising the CEO to basically enter into an agreement. And then note that the funding strategy, item 3, note that the funding strategy for the project will be considered by council as part of the annual budget process. Now, my question really is to the CEO. If a councillor, such as myself, wanted to ensure that this cost was paid for by all the ratepayers across the city, would this not create a difficult situation during the annual budget process where we're actually moving the amendment to actually separate this out and deal with it? We've got enough problems. Would it not be better to attempt to settle how we fund it now?
Mr. CEO.
So through the chair, what happens to this process, we then go back to Western Power to say we're participating. The funding is not, unless we have a final position on what the actual cost per dwelling is, which we may not have for 6 months. The funding strategy is not actually then adopted at the council meeting, with the exception where we know what loan funding will be required to initiate it. But I don't believe it would be possible to apply a charge across every ratepayer for the provision of a service to specific ratepayers.
Why not?
Because the benefit being derived here is to a specific group of ratepayers, not to all ratepayers. What you're asking for is individuals who are then, it's like saying, I'd like Councillor Miles, Councillor Zanino, etc., to provide a contribution to the cost of the upgrade of the power network that's specifically for the benefit of your property.
Yeah, but I think people in Midland would not see this as a benefit to themselves. They would see it as a disbenefit because they're having to pay in the order of $2,000.
No, I can't get into the issue of offering opinion or debate at this point in time. I don't think you'd be able to apply a cost that is applied to this. It's not a service you're delivering, it's a capital upgrade. It's specific to the properties in the area, and the standard provision by which it is done, it is applied as a charge just to the residences in that area. It's every scheme I've been involved in across Coburn and across Canning. It's an individual cost contribution.
Right, so it looks like we're saying you can't do that, councillor. So can we actually get McLeod's to advise us on this as to whether it is feasible to do that?
I'll seek some internal legal advice on the matter, and if
Mr. CEO, I would actually like McLeod's to do that.
If necessary, I'll look for external, but as I said, that's the nature of advice. I don't believe you can apply a charge of this nature to properties where the capital improvement is not specific to their residents.
Yeah, I think
but we'll come back to you, Councillor Johnson.
All right, so that's case, and I guess the question is, where will this decision be made? Would it have to be made as part of the annual budget deliberation? In which case, this decision is going to get mixed up with deciding what services we provide and what the % rate increase is. And I don't think that would be a good thing.
So through the chair, the first decision is council participating or not. Once the decision council participates or not, and subject to any specifics around the resolution, then the funding for the initiative is then resolved in the budget. If we know the individual cost contributions at that time, they'd be prescribed in the budget, consistent with the council's decision it makes on this item, and that's the determination we need to make. If we don't know the final cost contribution per dwelling, then there'll be a subsequent report coming back, and usually then the capital contribution will be required the year after.
All right, so if we know the information prior to the budget, we can make a decision about how that capital contribution is made prior to the budget, or if it's after the budget, we can make it after the budget. But what you're saying is if it happens at the same time, unfortunately, we've then got this collision where we're trying to decide whether people in Midland pay an extra $2,000 to have their power upgraded. At the same time, we're trying to determine the percentage rate increase. which I think would be
Just note
quite a
on
difficult
page
thing to do.
345, the estimated cost, Midland is 1,768, and the Woodbridge property is 3,916. So I'm not sure where you get the extra
I can tell you where I get
$2,000
it from. It
cost
says
for.
the total cost per property for project 235 Midland estimated as between $1,768.20 and $3,283.80. So that's what I'm saying, 2,000. So it's between those two numbers.
That's correct.
So what I'm concerned about is, in some way, can we guarantee to make this a separate decision from the budget? So decide yes or no prior, and we need proper advice about that.
We'll come back to you once the decision of council is made to participate in the process. If council makes a decision, then that's the approval then to expend funds. That commits the city to proceeding with the project. So as I said, we'll come back to you on the individual cost summary. The ideal is to have it in time for the budget, so we then make that decision at that point in time. But if it's not known, that it would be a decision separate to that.
Okay, any further questions?
So, all right, so I guess we could put in a change to the officer's recommendation to bring the decision separately to council. That would seem reasonable. The other question is, we've got, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4 councillors who aren't able to participate in this item because they've got either a financial or proximity interest. Can we write to the Minister on their behalf, allowing them to participate, given it's such a large group and it's such an important decision for people that they represent?
So where you have a financial proximity interest, you just simply can't participate. You
can, with permission.
If you wish to show me where they're able to, where they've got those direct interests, it's not a case of an impartiality interest or something of that nature, but the individual decision, the individual request to try and participate in a meeting of this nature would have to be from each individual councillor. And I notice the meeting is on next week. I don't believe you'd probably get a response back in time, going back to the Minister for Local Government on that. The general principle is if you have a financial or a proximity interest, you simply don't. And that avoids any suspicion that you're trying to influence an outcome for own personal benefit.
Right, so one or two councillors have said, no, you can't do that, and you've said that as well, Mr CEO. Actually, in the past, when we have had a number of councillors with proximity interests, we have written to the Minister and got permission, and we have written in the past, it is a feasible thing to do, it's in the Local Government Act, you can do that. Proximity, yeah, well, we got one with the proximity.
So again, you have a different outcome of the proximity versus financial, but it has to be for the individual to then want to request it, and that individual then the request goes after they've made it off to the Minister.
So who do they request to yourself?
So I'll just come back and check in the confirmation of the Act, but knowing that none of those persons in the room, I'll just come back, it has to be that individual making the application themselves.
To who? To the Minister or to yourself? Because previously when we've done this, that application has been made on behalf of councillors to the Minister.
Madam Mayor, can I just suggest that perhaps we can get this advice tomorrow or something like that?
We can do it now.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, I was asking you to obviously...
I'll just let the CEO confirm or come back with an answer.
I might answer that question in a minute, that's right, Madam Mayor.
So an interest is a direct or indirect?
No, you need to come back to this. We've got a minister exposed meetings. We've got ministerial, which is May.
You can confirm, but it looks like 5.6.
Yeah.
Okay.
Council CMA. I'm using this provision to 5.69. The member first needs to make their disclosure, and then the council or the member may apply through the CEO to the Minister So if there is an application, that can be sent off to the Minister for consideration. The Minister may allow on any condition the Minister disclosing member to participate in the meeting. So the individual must first come back, make the disclosure and then request that they want to be able to participate in the meeting.
Okay, so can we notify those councillors with those interests where that is possible that that's what they need to do?
Yes.
Because of course they're not here.
Well, we just need to finish discussing this item and then we'll bring them back in. Are there any other questions regarding that item before we bring those councillors back in?
Not at this stage.
Are there any other questions on that item before we call councillors back in? Okay. Thank you, Mr Bishop. And then go. Do you have to make a motion to go behind closed doors?
You'll need a motion behind closed doors to do the confidential one.
So move a motion in there.
We're not live streaming, there's no one else here. As a staff member who would need to leave. We don't have any other questions on.
We'll do that in a second. We'll just wait for the councillors to come back in and then we'll go to that next section. And
the questions on which item, do you know? Which confidential item? Okay. All right, okay, then you do what?
Okay.
Just a question. Can we give the advice that we just received?
Yep. Would you like to go right?
So just confirming for those who've made a declaration of interest, if you wanted to be able to participate in the item, you'd need to disclose the nature of interest and then write to me asking that an application be made to the Minister to see whether the Minister would allow you to participate in the meeting on that particular matter. I said there's no guarantee. And an application section, the Minister may allow, that's simply may.
Question?
Sorry, just excuse my ignorance. I'm just not too the financial interest. I mean, just because I just don't understand that, because it's just the whole underground power benefits like the entire community. I just don't think
It's a benefit for through the chair. It's a benefit for the people where the underground power is being supplied. If, for instance, Councillor Singh lives outside of your area, he's not getting a direct benefit, it's a benefit. So all those persons who in the area who are not only benefit but also have to pay for the cost, that's where the financial provision comes in. And as you're a decision maker, you might want to say, look, I'd want this to be provided for but not pay for it. So therefore you're trying to derive a direct financial benefit for yourself. Now just note we can't take questions on the item now, we're back in the chamber. But you'll just need to make your declaration, if you live in the area, as a financial interest.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that
No, that's okay. So if you've got any further questions, feel free to email the CEO regarding that and just send them through to him. Councillor Howlett, did you hear that? You're good? Okay. Okay, so we're going to move on to, we had some questions for... we had some questions on 16.1, which will require us to go behind closed doors into the confidential section. So I need a motion to go behind closed doors. Councillor Jones, seconded by Councillor Miles, and we will resume after this item. those that are in the gallery tonight, and thank you to staff and to councillors, and we'd like to close the meeting tonight at 9:06 p.m. Thank you.